And when we are saying that it is going to be a new era, it means that ABCDs of that particular era, if available with us, if we are well aware of that, that will help out us in the development of our career. So with this perspective and by welcoming Dr. Raju, I hand over to ma'am for starting the further sessions.
Thank you, sir. Once again, I welcome Dr. Raju Papneja today's expert for the today's expert session, quantum computing. Over to Dr. Raju, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this generous introduction. Is the screen visible and am I audible properly?
Yes, sir. Screen is visible. You are audible also, sir.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone. Welcome all the faculty and students who took out their time to join this session today. Let me just tell you, it's going to be, a very interesting session because quantum is something, as sir mentioned, not something which is as simple as 0 and 1. So when I heard that it's a 2-hour lecture, I was actually trying to understand how would people grasp this thing for 2 hours. It's going to be a very heavy session. So what I've done is I've tried to, make it in such a way that it becomes easy for us to understand the fundamentals of quantum. But let us see at the end of the session how much we are able to derive out of this, because I have tried my best to make it as easy as possible. But as I know, as it is, when I was doing it for the first time, it took me days and days to understand, because it is not about just learning now. It is about unlearning what we have learned till now, and that is the biggest challenge that quantum brings for all of us. So basically, when somebody says, what is this quantum computing? My answer would really be, it is something like, for us, for all the students here who are doing their BE, it becomes very confusing. It is something like, by the time you realized how the classical computers worked and how you programmed, which you are still learning, probably for AI, ML, suddenly, something comes in and it completely changes the way things used to work, what we call as disruption. That is what quantum is bringing to us. So it is exactly like, by the time you figure out some answers to your questions of life, life changes the question itself. And that is what is happening. That is how simply we can define a quantum computer and the disruption that it is going to bring. Almost, 1900s, it was, I think, early 1900s when quantum mechanics emerged as a branch of physics to explain the nature on the scale of atoms. And it led to advances such as transistors and magnetic resonance and lasers, imaging. So the idea to merge quantum mechanics and information theory, which is our computing, it arose in the around 1970s. But very little attention came to it till 1980s. When one of the physicists, Richard Feynman, gave a talk in which he reasoned that computing based on classical logic could not practically process calculations describing quantum phenomena. Computing based on quantum phenomena configured to simulate other quantum phenomena, however, would not be subject to the same bottleneck. Although ultimately eventually became the field of quantum simulation, not much activity happened during the 80s also. It was in 90s, however, that interest in quantum computing started to rise dramatically when one mathematician named Peter Shor, he developed the quantum algorithm, which could find the prime factors of a large number efficiently. And when we say efficiently, it means in a time of practical relevance, which is beyond the capability of any supercomputer or classical algorithm that exists today. This may seem a little odd, but it is impossible to overstate what Peter Shor visualized. Today, when we talk about the security and crypto security system, the RSA system, they all rely on such kind of prime number factors. And that is why they are not easy to break today by classical computers. But it is said that quantum computing, once it picks up, the security of today can be broken in less than 1 second. So now, is it a hype? Is quantum computing just a hype? Or is it something, that it is there to stay? Is it going to change the world? So what is this quantum computing? In a nutshell, quantum computing or quantum computer is a machine that will perform calculations based on the laws of quantum mechanics. And what is quantum mechanics? It is how nature behaves. It is how the particles in the universe behave at the atomic and subatomic level, at the level of electrons and protons. That is what quantum physics is. That is what quantum mechanics is. And it is this principle of quantum mechanics that is used to build a quantum computer, which basically has the power to solve certain problems in fraction of seconds, which could not be solved by any supercomputer for billions of years. That is the power and that is the disruption quantum computing is promising us. So around 1900, late 1900s, Feynman, he said that, he could say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. And it is true even today. We only know a very small part of quantum mechanics, how the nature in itself works, how the universe works, how the particles interact with each other. So he created this idea of creating quantum machines which are based on quantum mechanics. So basically saying that if classical machines are not able to solve something, then quantum machines should be able to solve them. And a quantum Turing machine was developed as a model. Then 1994, as I said, was the first time that some algorithm was actually practically demonstrated, which was done by Peter Shor to figure out the factorization of prime numbers. And then there were more algorithms, like a famous one which is called the Grover's algorithm, that was developed in late 90s, which is a searching algorithm with order of square root n complexity. And I'm assuming that you know what an order of complexity is, being the students of computer science. That being said, so let's say we are using this, I personally am using this HP laptop today, which is a great technology, but we all agree that the technology we are using today will be replaced by new technology in the future, which today we might not even be able to imagine. And that has happened, right? Nobody imagined a smartphone 20 years back. It just happened one day in 2006 when Apple came out with it. Now, if you talk to any physicist, you will come to know that the crowning achievement in the 20th century has actually been the development of quantum theory. And it is natural to wonder how the emergence of quantum theory that was done in 20th century is now going to impact the technology of 21st century. Though quantum theory, which is more than 100 years old, as I said in the early 1900s, there are still, we are just at the beginning. We are at the cusp of beginning, trying to understand, because we do not understand nature. We only understand a drop of the ocean. Similarly, quantum mechanics or quantum theory, which is 100 years old, but we only understand, or we are beginning to understand how quantum mechanics work, and how quantum and classical systems differ from each other. A lot of differences actually have to do with the physical nature of information itself. So for information, it is something like, think about this book. We can encode and store this book in a state of physical system, right? Like pages. We have so many pages in a book. It is a physical system. But we also know that fundamentally, all physical systems are in reality nothing but a quantum system. And therefore, information is something that we should be able to encode and store in quantum state also. Now, information carried by these quantum systems have some very peculiar counterintuitive properties, and that is referred by scientists as the weirdness of quantum theory. But at the same time, these physicists or scientists are also working to see if somehow this weirdness of quantum theory can be utilized to perform tasks that were not possible using the classical predictable physics that we know about. Now, along with this weirdness theory, there is one more important aspect which we should understand, which is giving push to this quantum mechanics and quantum computing specifically. And that point is that historically, if you see on the right top, the silicon chips, they were obeying the Moore's law, and we all know Moore's law, right? Which says that the number of transistors in a chip is going to double every year or every 2 years. So the doubling of transistors on a chip every few years. But what is happening now? The Moore's law is stalling due to the physical limits of what can be done with silicon. Silicon, again, is a physical thing, and there is a limit to every physical thing. So the problem currently facing chip design is sadly physics itself, because physics does not allow. So using silicon, it's impossible now to create a transistor in which the gate, the part of the transistor that switches on or off to control the flow of electrons, if you have taken electronics, is smaller than 7 nanometers. So it does not allow the gate to be smaller than 7 nanometers. Make them any smaller and electrons can move between the transistors through a process which now they call as quantum tunneling, which means that a transistor in an off state could unexpectedly switch off, and an on state could unexpectedly switch on, even if it is not supposed to behave like that. Now, this gives rise to a very big problem to the future of our supercomputers. Also, by 2020, it was said that we will hit the natural limits on the size of transistors, which we have already done, which we have crossed now. Max out on the number of transistors per chip. So one chip can have X number of transistors, and that is based on the size of the transistor. Now, if the size of the transistor has gone down to 7 nanometers, then how many transistors can actually fit on a chip? So reach the limit of which also means that the transistors have reached the limit of speed of the devices, because now you cannot add any more gates on the chip. Eventually, what we are left with, that all computing in the future will have to be done by some alternate methods, because we have reached the maximum capacity of transistors of silicon and the size of the chip. What are these alternative computing methods? You must have heard about DNA computing. You must have heard about
Yes, sir.
automation, and we have quantum computing. So these are the three promising fields that we will look at: the DNA, cellular automation, and quantum computing. We are today going to focus on this program is focused on quantum computing. So our whole theory will revolve, and the understanding will revolve around quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and quantum computing. So until now, we have relied on supercomputers to solve most of the problems. And these are very large classical computers, often thousands of CPUs and graphical processing units, cores. However, supercomputers aren't very good at solving certain types of problems. Though the problems seem to be very easy initially, but when you try to solve it using classical physics or a classical computing even using the best supercomputers we have today, it will take ages and ages to solve that problem. And in some cases, it is just not solvable. So we need to acknowledge the fact number one, that yes, classical computers, which have been there for so long, they have enabled us to do amazing things. Even this today's session is enabled by a computer, a classical computer, a laptop using zeros and ones. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that there still exists a lot of problems we just cannot solve by a classical computer. And we will go through those problems later in the session today. But keeping this as the basis, these two facts as the basis, we will proceed from here and take our session forward. There are many quantum phenomena that make quantum computing weird, and which forms the basis of what we are currently trying to understand. But before we go there, let us take an example of two people coming to a party. You throw a party at your home and two of your friends come. How many ways they can sit across the table? So you have one table and two people. You will see that those people can sit across in two possible combinations. Either the light blue one can be on the left side or on the right side of the table. And similarly, the dark blue circle that you see. So these are the two combinations which are possible. And this happens by what we call 2 factorial. Similarly, if you call 5 people, then how many combinations are possible in which way these 5 people can sit across one table? So that gives rise to 5 factorial, which is 5 into 4 into 3 into 2. And that is 120 different ways these people can sit. Take this a little ahead. What happens if I call 10 people? You will be surprised that when you call 10 people, how many possible combinations are there in which these people can be seated across the table? It's 3.6 million possible combinations. Now think about a classical computer. It has to do all these combinations one after another using the bits 0 and 1. What kind of bits and bytes would it require to do this kind of calculation? Now, I assume that, before we go ahead, let us understand the basis of quantum, which is qubits. Just like we have bits in classical computing, we all know about bits. We have qubits, which is quantum bits in quantum computing, and which is analogous to a bit in classical computer, but there's a subtle difference. And I assume everybody knows what a classical bit is. When representing such a bit, we say it is either 0 or it is 1. And when we write 0 or 1, it completely determines the information the bit contains. There is no ambiguity. When a 0 is there in the bit, it means it is 0. Now, when we switch to what happens if we take an example of 4 bits? How many possible combinations we can write using 4 bits? So you see on the right side, first bit can have 0, second can have 0, third can have 0, and fourth can have 0. So you have 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. These are all the combinations which are basically 4 factorial. So 4 into 3 into 2. And that's kind of what we can do with this. Now, when switching to quantum bit or qubit, we generally write, so the beauty of qubit is that every bit can store a 0 or it can store a 1. Interestingly, it can also store a 0 and a 1. This is where a qubit differs from a classical bit. So it can either store 0, a 1, or 0 and 1 together. How is this possible? How is it possible that some bit can be in 2 states at the same time? Let's take an example of a coin. A coin has 2 sides, heads and tails. Let's say heads means that we are storing 1 in the bit, and tails means that we are storing 0 in the bit. Now, when we say that a bit can have both heads and tails, is it really possible? Well, till today, based on our knowledge, it was not possible. But going forward, this is not how quantum is going to work, because in quantum mechanics or quantum physics, it is possible that an electron or a subatomic particle can be in multiple states and multiple positions at the same time. To understand using this, imagine when you flip a coin in the air. Let's say I flip a coin in the air. At this time, when it is in the air, if I were to ask you which state is in it, is it heads or is it tails? Is it 0 or is it 1? And you will say, well, it is juggling between 0 and 1. You cannot say the actual state. It can be anything. It can be 20% tails, or it can be 40% tails, 60% tails, 30% head. This is how we can understand to the best of our ability how quantum would be working. But what is interesting is that when the coin finally comes down, we don't measure the coin when it is up in the air. When it comes down and it becomes stable, and when we measure it or observe it on the ground, it is always either heads or tails. It is never both. Well, unless it's a coin from Cholet, we all know. But other than that, you will see that it will either have a heads or a tails when it falls down. So what it says is that in quantum mechanics, A bit can be in two positions at the same time. It can be 0, it can be 1 at the same time. But when you measure that bit, it will always be either 0 or 1. It will never be both. And this is where it becomes a little complex to understand, because we are not used to this kind of mechanics. And unless we understand this basic, I'm stressing a lot on this basic, we will never be able to understand quantum mechanics. And we will never be able to understand quantum computing, therefore. Now, let's say if I were to crack a 4-bit password, okay? One of these bits is my password, and we don't know which one. How would classic computer try to solve this problem? To solve this problem, first, we will write a program which will take the first 4 bits, put it into the classical computer, match it with the actual password. If it is correct, then it will say it is correct. Otherwise, it will say it's incorrect. Then it will go and take the second one, third one, fourth one, and so on till we reach all the 16 combinations here. And then we will try to understand. So it's n-1. We'll try to understand where we fit in. But it has to go sequentially through each and every different combination to check which is the correct password. Look, the same thing if I were to do using quantum computer. Using 4 quantum bits, instead of bits, I'm using 4 quantum bits, which can be 0 and 1 at the same time. What happens is, these 16 bits that you are seeing at the top, and every time my 4 bits can only have one combination in classical computer, when we use quantum bits and pass this information to a quantum computer, all 16 combinations are stored in 4 qubits at the same time, and they are processed at the same time. So what took 16 iterations for a 4-bit password to be decoded in a classical computer would take only 1 pass in quantum computer, because all the bits can be either 1, 0, or a combination of 1 and 0. And this is what is called superpositioning of bytes or bits. And what it will throw out, it will not only throw out which is the correct password, it will throw out the combination which is correct and also all the other 15 combinations which are incorrect. So at the same time, it is going to compute all 16 possible combinations, and it will send out 15 bits, combination of bits which are false, and 1 which is true, which has matched the password. So now the problem is, how do we understand which one is it? Because we need to know the password. So then there is the algorithms of quantum that come in scene. So what we call quantum algorithms, like the Shor's algorithm, or in this case, we use the Grover's algorithm. Love Grover, he created this algorithm. And this algorithm can take this qubit, and within fraction of a second, it can bring out which one is the correct answer, eliminating all the wrong answers. It will immediately eliminate all the wrong answers. And that's what we call the Grover operator in quantum computing. So what would take millions of years for a normal computer to do can be done by quantum computer in minutes. And this is the promise of quantum computing, and this can only happen if we work on the phenomena of quantum mechanics. Now let us understand, what does this quantum mechanics work on? So to understand the computational power of these quantum computers, we have to understand few things. One thing that we understood was what forms the basis, which is qubits. The other thing, so we have seen that a qubit is richer than a classical bit because to fully know its state, we need to know both what is the 0 and what is the 1. Now, what happens? So let's look at what things make up this this quantum mechanics. What weird things that make up, when physicists say there are weird phenomena of quantum mechanics on which quantum computer works. What are those weird phenomena? So these 5 things we will focus on during our 2 days of session, without which it is impossible to achieve quantum mechanics and quantum computing. So first is superposition, second is interference, third is entanglement, fourth is the computation itself, the algorithms, and fifth is the error correction. These are the bases of our quantum computing session. Now, we already saw 0 and 1, right? We already saw that a qubit can has 2 stages. Now, if you see superposition, that is exactly what it is. At any point in time, if you look at a classical computer on the left, you will see a bit can have 2 states, 0 and 1. The blue one is saying 1. While if you go to the quantum states, you will see that it can be 0, it can be 1, or it can be any of the possible combinations that you see on the last circle on the right, which is called the Bloch sphere. And with n number of qubits, you can traverse 2 raised to n paths, which means that if you have 3 qubits, you can do 2 raised to 3 computations at the same time, which is you can traverse 8 different paths at the same time. With 4 qubits, that extends to 16, and so on and so forth. How are they written? If you see on the left top, you see a straight line, 0 and an angular bracket, or you see a straight line, 1 and an angular bracket. These basically are notations for how a 0 is written in qubit and how a 1 is written in qubit. We don't need to go into the details of why it is like this. We leave that to the physicist, but it is important to understand that this is the notation because it will be used a lot in our quantum computing. And when we speak about it, when we pronounce it, the straight line that's known as ket, and the angular bracket is known as bra. So it's a ket 0 bra or ket 1 bra. So that's how 0 and 1 are written in quantum computing. And when we are in a quantum state, which is not just 0 or just 1, but a combination, then we write A of 0 plus B of 1, where A and B are complex numbers. And if we square A and B, A square plus B square, it will come out to be 1. So these 2 formulas you need to just mug up. This is the basis of quantum computing. Okay. So a quantum bit can be in state 0, in state 1, or 0 plus 1, any combination of A0 plus B1. So this basically shows that the qubit is richer than a classical bit, because to fully know its state, you must know the A and the B, not just the 0 or the 1. And this A and B are numbers on their own. So this again can be represented by classical bits. So if you want to represent 1 qubit on a classical computer, example, a 64-bit representation, you need 2 into 64 classical bits to represent 2 complex numbers A and B. What really unleashes the power of quantum computer is when you start combining the qubits together. Now the fun really begins when you are combining these qubits together. Till now, we were looking at only 1 qubit, which can be 0, 1, or anything between 0 and 1. Now assume that we have 3 qubits that we bring together. So how does 3 bits of classical system or today's computer differ from 3 qubits of quantum computer? Let us try to understand that. If I were to write 3 bits, it is very simple for me to know that the states of these 3 bits can be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, so on and so forth. A limited number of states, maybe 6 number of states. All these bits can predictably be in these states. So first bit can be 0 or 1, second can also be 0 or 1, third can also be 0 or 1. What happens in case of 3 qubits? So if I had 3 qubits, the state of the qubit, every qubit can be a combination of all these 6 states multiplied by a different complex number, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And for understanding this concept of complex numbers and vectors, you will need to do a little bit study of discrete mathematics if you have not done it. You have to brush up your knowledge of discrete mathematics. So if you understand that, but for now we need to understand that qubit can store anything of this combination rather than just one bit like 0 or 1. So which means that a qubit can be 0, 0, 0, a qubit can be 1, 1, 1, but the 3 qubits can also be a combination of the above that you see. So that's a difference between how bits work and how qubits work. Now, the interesting thing about a combination of qubit is that they have some coefficients that define their state. But these coefficients are not local for each qubit. They are global. And to understand that, you will understand when we see the session tomorrow, which talks about entanglement. So now there are 8 combinations possible, which means there are 8 coefficients that we can use. Right? The fact that they are global means that in general these coefficients cannot be derived from local states like the single qubit state. If that was the case, we would have only 6 choices that we saw above in classical qubit, but because we derive it from a global state, you will see this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. There are 8 states that these complex numbers can be derived from. And this is linked to entanglement. As I said, the system of qubits acts as a whole. Each qubit cannot be seen as an independent unit. In classical computer, you see each bit as independent. In quantum computing, you cannot see a qubit as independent because it is linked to many other qubits globally. Now, in a maximal entangled state, if there is a state of a qubit where coefficients except A and H all are 0, let's say except the A and H, everything else is 0, B, C, D, E, F, G, then it is the maximum state of entanglement, which has no local equivalent since it cannot be written as a product of 3 local states. Now let's look at, I know this part is confusing, but it was very important to understand this part. Now to make it simpler and a little more easier to understand, let's see how this superposition of 0 and 1 can be applied to games. Let's say we were to write a game of quantum chess. We all have played chess on computer. What if it was a quantum chess? we will start with the classical chess. Okay, just all the rules of classical chess that we know today. And let's say now that we are making a quantum chess where players have the ability to perform quantum moves in addition to the standard chess moves. They can still perform standard chess moves because a quantum computer can do the same thing as classical computer also, but it can also do quantum moves. So each time a player chooses to move any piece, the player can indicate whether they want to perform a standard move or they want to perform a quantum move. Now, if you perform a quantum move, it will create a superposition of boards. For every quantum move, you will have superposition of two boards. So it will be multiple boards on which the pieces will exist. Now in quantum chess, this number of possible boards is not fixed. It can increase, it can decrease. All possible boards can exist in a superposition. This is how it could be something like, but end of the day, what will happen is, the player will always be presented with a single board, which is ultimately the result of all the superposition of boards. But the player doesn't see that. The player only sees one board. So in quantum chess, any individual move actually acts on all the boards which are in superposition at the same time. Okay. Now let's look at the pictures that might clarify these things. So you saw the chessboard begins with a standard chess on the left. All the pawns move the same as they would move in a standard chess, but all other pieces get a choice of two movement types, standard or quantum. Standard moves act exactly as they would in the standard chess. However, quantum moves create superpositions. Now, let's look at an example of a quantum move of a white queen. If you see before the quantum move, you will see that the queen can move from D1. So at the bottom it is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and on the y-axis it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So queen is in D1 and it can move up till D3. Classical computer will only let you move either to D2 or D3. But when we do a quantum move, it creates a superposition of two boards. And the state of the two boards can be that either the queen moved or the queen did not move. If the queen moved, then it will go to D3, and 50% chance is there that the queen moved, and 50% chance is there that the player did not move the queen, and if player did not move the queen will remain in D1. So 50% D1 plus 50% D3. So two boards have got created in the system. Now that's quantum computing. It created two boards in the system. The player doesn't see this. What does the player see? The player sees either it has moved or it has not moved. So the player will only see one out of the two combinations. Either it will see the queen in D3 or it will see the queen in D1. It will not see in both. But in the interim state, it was in both. Going forward, let's say after that standard move, from D, now if I want to move this queen from D3 to B5, okay, B is my second column, fifth row. If I want to move there, again there is a 50% chance that it will move there and 50% chance it will not move there. So what more boards will be created, more superposition of boards will be created, and what will those boards be? either it will be moved to B5 or it will not be moved to B5. So now we have 4 superposition of boards. Look at the boards. In one, the queen is in D1. In one, the queen is in D3. In one, the queen is in D5. And each has a 50% possibility of existing. What does the player see when the player goes in? The player sees that queen is either in D1 or the queen is in D5. It has moved from D3 to D5. Though in the, sorry, D3 to B5, though in the superposition system, it might have not moved. But at the final system, the player will either see B5 or it will see D1 or it will see B3. It will not see all the possible combinations. Now we saw that, some of you might have noticed that quantum move basically gives you a 50% chance to pass your turn. Not a very exciting thing to do, that we pass our turn, but it allows us, and that's why let's give quantum move an added bonus here. What if I give a bonus that with a quantum move, you can choose a target space that is up to 2 standard moves away? For example, the queen can choose to target D1 to B3. Is it possible in classical computer? It is not possible to go from D1 to B3. But because in quantum computer or quantum mechanics, it is possible that I can skip my chance. I did not move at all. 50% chance was there. I also have a 50% chance to make a double move, which means I go from D1 to D3 and from D3 to B3 in one move. Again, it creates 2 superposition boards. One is that I moved. If I moved, I will go to B3. If I did not move, I will remain at D1. That is what 2 boards at the bottom are showing. Now, let's look at the quantum queen move from this D1 to B3. Just like previous quantum move, we get a 50% probability that the move is successful and a 50% probability that nothing happened. Now, there is a 50% chance the queen completed the 2 standard moves in one turn. Right? There's a 50% chance that it moved it. It's 2 moves, but yeah, it's a 50% chance. And it's a 50% chance that the queen did not move at all. Don't worry, it's not random. You might think all this is so random, it doesn't obey the laws of nature or the classical physics. But that is exactly what the weirdness of quantum computing is all about. It does not obey classical physics. It obeys the laws of the universe, which we still do not understand completely. And this movement, the fact that the board is a superposition of many boards, why we cannot, our brain
मॅडम सरांचा ऑडिओ स्टॉप झाला होता.
सर त्यांच्याकडनं प्रॉब्लेम झाला दिसतं काहीतरी
हा ठीक आहे. मी त्यांना मेसेज टाकला आता.
हो हो पाहिलं माझं.
नाहीतर मग तुम्ही कॉल कराल का त्यांना एकदा?
ओके सर, करते का. हॅलो सर, तुमचा व्हिडिओ आणि ऑडिओ दोन्ही विजिबल नाही आहेत आता. हां, नाही सर, म्हणजे काही दिसत नाही. म्हणजे तुम्ही व्हिडिओ दिसत होता पण आता व्हिडिओ पण दिसत नाही. आत्ता एक 2 मिनिटापूर्वी सर, जास्ती नाही. हो, आत्ता.
Okay, let me share it again.
या दिसतंय सर तुम्ही आता.
Okay.
दिसतंय.
Okay, so we were here. What I was trying to say was that our brain does not understand the superposition of boards, and that is why it becomes very complex for us to understand that how can a queen go from D1 to B3. But the day we start understanding the laws of nature, or how the universe or how the subatomic particles work in the universe, it will be easy for us. And this movement of 2 steps at a time is called unitary movement, not a binary movement, but a unitary movement. And it can lead to some very interesting facts, which we will understand now. Now, this experiment, Schrodinger's cat experiment, a hypothetical cat in the world, this gives a more simpler way to understand the superposition, even though at the end of this whole thing we remain confused, but the confusion drops a little bit. So let's understand let's go through this Schrodinger's cat experiment that was done, and let's analyze this as part of quantum. So let's say we have a container, we have a steel container, and we have a cat in the container. We also have a radioactive material and poison in the container. So we have these different things in the container. Okay? Now we close the lid of the container. Closing the lid basically removes it or isolates it from the environment. Now, in a perfect world, the quantum computer should be isolated from the environment, but it is not feasible today to do that. Same as with the cat, it is not feasible, but for the experiment, let us assume that it is isolated from the environment. Now, when you look into when you open the link again and when you look into it, you will see that either the cat is alive or you will see that the cat is dead. These are the only 2 states that we will think about. But the cat, ironically, just before opening the lid, can be in either of the states. It can be dead and alive at the same time. The moment you look into it, you will only see one. Either it is dead or alive. But when it was closed, it could be anything which you don't know. The probability of a dead cat was 50%. The probability of a live cat was also 50%. So when we are saying a qubit, it is 0 and 1 at the same time, but as soon as you look into it, it drops down either to 0 or 1. But before looking, it could be anything. Now, how is that possible? Is it really possible that it is dead and alive at the same time? So to understand that, let's say an atom in this radioactive substance that we have, the green substance, let's say one of the atom in the radioactive substance decays. Atom has this property of decaying. Because of this decaying, what happens? The wheel breaks open and it releases poison. So this wheel here, it breaks open and the poison is released, because you know how atom bombs, how they blast. So once this atom blasts, it's going to break this wheel and the poison will come out. Once the poison comes out, the cat dies. Is there a possibility? Yes. But you did not see all this. When you opened the lid, it was either 0 or 1. It was dead. That's it. That's all you saw. On the other hand, no atom in the radioactive substance decays. It is also possible that none of them decayed. Now, if none of them decayed, the poison is not released. The poison is not released, which means the cat is alive. So, an atom, now this is where it becomes interesting. The atom in the radioactive substance is in both the states. We know atom, electron, proton, they can be at different states at the same time. So an atom in the radioactive substance is in a state of both decayed and undecayed, which ironically means that the cat is both dead and alive at the same time, because the atom is in both the states at that time. Why we don't understand? Because we have not measured it. We have not opened the lid. It's only after opening the lid we see the final result. But we can say that it is dead and alive at the same time. And this principle of superposition says that if an object can be in any configuration, and if the object could also be in any other configuration, which means if a cat can be dead and a cat can also exist as a live cat, then the cat can also be in a state which is a superposition of the two states. It's a hypothetical experiment, but it's an experiment. So a cat, if it can be live and if it can be dead, then it can also be live and dead at the same time. And this thought experiment uses this and transforms an indeterminacy in the atomic domain to macroscopic indeterminacy. Now, why we cannot understand this is because of the macroscopic nature. If we went to the microscopic nature or a nanomicroscopic or the atomic nature, we can understand this. So people in physics understand this, but people using classical computing like us, we do not understand how this is possible. Now, here is the problem. Okay, we understood it can be live and it can be dead at the same time. We try to understand that it can decay and it cannot decay at the same time. Now, if an atom of the radioactive substance can be both decayed and non-decayed at the same time, this leads to our conclusion that the cat can be both dead and alive at the same time. But the problem is that we can never observe the cat in that situation. Can we ever see the cat dead and alive at the same time? Now you might say that's a problem. I can never see that. And which is true, we cannot. So, but when we open the lid, we see it in one position. So how do I believe that it was in both the positions? So here comes an interesting explanation from the Copenhagen interpretation of the same experiment, where he says, as soon as you observe a qubit, it stops being in superposition and it will either become 0 or it will either become 1. Now, how interesting is that? As soon as you open the lid, it will stop being in the state of superposition. It will either be alive or either be dead. Now, this is something which superposition, the weirdness in quantum mechanics, using superposition of quantum mechanics, can help us to build quantum computing. And very weird logics or algorithms in quantum computing that might look stupid to us in classical computing, but it is possible doing quantum computing. Similarly, going forward, the second point that I mentioned was of interference. What is interference? To understand interference, you know how light waves or sound waves, we know the waves interfere with each other. We all know that. We have read it in physics, right? So there was this Young's double slit experiment, again a very famous experiment, that what happens when we interfere? How does the interference of subatomic particles work? Now, since it can be in both the states, remember, even a particle can be in both the states, which means it can be in a particle form or it can be in a wave form. A light is also a particle and a light is also a wave form. A sound can be a particle, a sound can be a wave form. So now, here comes an interesting experiment. This is again the weirdness continues of quantum mechanics, and this demonstrates with unparalleled strangeness, I would say, that little particles of matter, even the tiniest particles of matter, have something of a wave about them. And they suggest that the very act of observing a particle changes their behavior. Just like we saw in superposition, the very act of observing the object changes its state to 0 or 1. Similarly, the very act of observing the particle changes its behavior. Now, let's say, we fire electrons. There is one slit in the screen and there is an electron firing gun. And let's say we fire an electron. It passes through that one slit and it will strike the second wall. How would it look? Just like tennis ball is thrown through the gap. It will form a spot. It will form a spot on the detector. So when I am sending all these tennis balls kind of particles, it will form this kind of thing at the detector, that every ball will leave its a dot there. This is where I fell. This is where I fell. Now what happens when we make two slits? Instead of one slit, we make two slits. What is the expected behavior? What should happen? It should have two different lines at the detector, right? It should have, with a single slit, this was the particle behavior. It should have two lines, because what went through line 1 should go here, what went through line 2 should go at the bottom. This is what we expect when tennis balls are thrown through this slit. While we expect two rectangular strips on the wall, but what you actually see in the experiment is very different. The spots where the electrons hit, they all build up to replicate the interference pattern of wave. This is how the pattern builds up on the detector, which shouldn't be the case, because you are only firing straight through the two guns. And these are tennis balls, these are particles, right? These were not waves. Now, if it were particles, why didn't they just don't go and form like this? How did they form this wave kind of thing? So, what does this experiment basically tells us is that the particles, such as electrons, they somehow combine the characteristics of particles and the characteristics of waves at the same time. And this, again, weirdly, is also known as the famous wave-particle duality of quantum mechanics. So this is another phenomena, wave-particle duality. Now, this interference pattern, it's showing the nature of wave also, and it's showing the nature of particle also. Interestingly enough, if you slow down the gun and just emit a single photon, do you think it will be interference like this? Or would it be something like this? Just one photon going through. We would expect that it would be a single tennis ball going and leaving just a single dark spot out there. But interestingly enough, even when a single photon is sent, it will create this. When a single photon, which means that the single photon did not go through one slit, it went through both the slits. Which means before going, it created a wave. Though it is a particle, it must have created a wave. Otherwise, if the wave was not there, how could it go into both the slits? And after going into both the slits, it again created more waves and interference between the waves, and then it created this interference kind of result on the detector. Otherwise, it should have been only two straight lines on the detector. So even with a single photon, which means every atomic particle, subatomic particle, has this particle wave duality built within them. Now the question arises, how can a photon interfere with itself? There's one photon, how can it interfere with itself? The only way it could have interfered with itself is if it formed a wave, it passed through the two slits. Those two slits formed more waves and they interfered with each other like this. Only then we can see something like this. Now with an aim to test, now let us test from which slit the photon is actually passing to reach to the other side, right? Did the photon pass through this upper slit or the lower slit? Which one did it pass through? If I wanted to check from where did it go, let us place a monitor near one of the slits. Okay? And again, repeat the same experiment, just one photon passing by. Now we have a monitor, okay, to detect it. Again, the weirdness of quantum mechanics comes in. As soon as you put a monitor to detect it, that photon which behaved like a wave suddenly starts behaving like a particle. It does not behave like a wave anymore. It has collapsed to 0 or 1. It is not 0 and 1 anymore. It just collapsed to 0 or 1. This is again very interesting. As soon as you see it, it is never in the waveform. But it does make an interference. If you don't see it, it is in the waveform. So what do you expect now? You know, this is what it is. It is simple, but it's complicated, isn't it? It's simply complicated quantum mechanics. So what did Copenhagen interpret? That the act of observing triggered the collapse of the photon's wave function. Just like superposition, the act of observing collapsed it to either dead or alive. Here it collapsed it to either particle or wave function property of that photon. So it's a justifiable explanation if you understand what I mean. It's difficult, I know, but then some questions still arise. What does observation mean? Does observation mean human interference? Does it mean that I am watching, standing there watching with a microscope what is happening? Does that mean? If yes, then why? If no, then the question is, why does the wave function not collapse when there is no detector in the chamber? Only if there is a detector in the chamber, it collapses and it gives one or two lines of the slit. There is nothing, then it becomes a waveform and it gives a wave kind of detector at wave detection at the result. So these questions, to understand this, is understanding quantum mechanics. And to understand this, what physicists have said, that there is a very large number of universes. And the state of the observer is entangled with the state of the cat. The alive and dead cats were actually both real, but they cannot interact with each other because the observer was outside the steel box. So observer has its own existence, the dead cat has its own existence, and the live cat, all of them has its own existence, but they belong to different universes. They all remember their own history, but they all belong to different universes. And many other such worlds have interpreted it, but no one has come to a final that this is it, this is the interpretation. Now, what will this mean to artificial intelligence? How will it apply to artificial intelligence? Think about it. If we say, okay, the Young's double slit experiment, we understood it, then there is a serious limitation for what artificial intelligence would be able to do. Why? Now see, we understood that according to this quantum theory, system will evolve casually until it is observed. So we understood this part of it, right? That till we observe it, it will be in any state, but once we observe, it will come down and it will break that chain of being in any state. So if these intelligent machines, or the so-called artificial intelligent machines, if they are going to continuously keep on learning, then they should not be observed, because they will be in the state of continuous superposition. They are learning. The moment we observe it, it is going to lose and drop down to 0 or 1. So the learning, now the problem is that learning will only happen from environment. And now when we say environment, we have to open the lid. If we open the lid, then we observe, and if we observe, then we only see one state, which means the learning stops. So this also gives the possibility, according to quantum, that such intelligent machines who will always keep on learning would never exist, because they are hypothetical. The moment you observe them, they will stop learning. How are these qubits represented? So I already told you, there's a ket and there's a bra. So qubit can be in two energies. We say excited state of an atom, or ground state of an atom, or it can be in any other state between ground states. So state 0 and state 1. It can be also a combination of state 0 and state 1 multiplied by complex numbers. So it's in any state at the same time. And for respect of time, we will just move ahead. If we attempt to retrieve the values, the superposition randomly collapses to one of the original values. I think we get the point very clearly till here about superposition. It can be in two states, 0, 1, and any state between 0 and 1. And interference, that it can be at any moment till you observe. It can be in any state, and once you observe, it will collapse to one of the states. These two weird things or phenomena of quantum form the basis of what we know as quantum computing. Why do we say quantum computers are powerful? They can do so much in so less time. What is it that makes them powerful? Well, it's qubits, but you know what in qubits? Qubits, it's the power of scaling of qubits. We already saw that it does 2 raised to n. So with 3 qubits, we have 8 combinations. With 4, we have 16. With 5, we have 32. That's the power of scaling. To when we go to, let's take this example of a classic example of, it's a fable, it's a tale that some person who invented chess, he went to the emperor and he said, that this is the game I have invented and I want a reward for it. So the emperor said, okay, what do you want? And he said, nothing much. I just want you to give me 1 grain of rice on day 1. Then on the second day, on second square, you put double the rice, which is 2 grains, and then 4 grains and 8 grains. And you fill the 64 squares for me, that's all. So he said, okay, let's do that. And that was a small task. Now, up till the 8th day, when you had 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and 128 grains of rice on the 8th box in row 1, the total grains were 128 plus 64 plus 32 plus 16, which means 255, which is 2 to the power of 8 minus 1. So as I say, 2 to the power of n. N is the number of squares. So it was 255 grains. When we reached box number 20, that day the king had to give 1 million grains, rice grains, and the total grains on the board was 2 raised to 20 minus 1, which is 2.1 million grains of rice. This is how it was doubling up. Now, when we finish doubling for all the 64 squares on the board, the total number of grains on the whole board will be 1 grain less than the number we would get by multiplying 64 twos. 2 into 2 into 2 into 2, 64 times. And how many grains is that? Would that fill a pile on our desk, or would it fill a room? Maybe our college, our town, our city. How much will it be? So by the time the doubling reached 21st square, million grains of rice were needed, and on the 64th square, it would be 2 raised to 63. And what is 2 raised to 63? It is basically that could be more rice than humans have ever harvested in the entire history of the earth combined together. This is the kind of power that qubits bring to the table. And look at the numbers in relation to the qubits. We can see this explosive nature of qubit. It takes only 13 qubits to store 1 kilobyte. 1 kilobyte and a half, basically, in comparison. Let's look at a larger scale with both memory and time. Let us assume we have a classical computer with a clock speed of CPU speed of, what do we have now? 3 gigahertz, let's say. Let's also assume one operation on a classical state can be done in 1 clock cycle. So the computer can perform 3 billion operations per second, 3 billion. Now 63 qubits contain as much classical bits as an exabyte of data. Just 63 qubits, for which you would have to, in classical computer, you would require 1 exabyte of storage, can be stored in only 63 qubits. And what it would take, 97.5, which is 100 years, a complete decade to store in our today's classical database, can be stored within seconds in 63 qubits. That's the power that qubit is bringing to us. And what is 63? What is 63 bits? 63 bits is just less than 8 bytes. 8 8s are 64. So it is like 8 bytes. So If we were to use classical systems, 8 bytes can only store 8 characters, isn't it? But when we are talking about 63 or 64 or 8 qubits or 63 or 64 qubits, we are thinking or talking about storing 1 exabyte of data. Something that could take a century to simulate would be done in few seconds using 64 qubits or 63 qubits. So coming back, there are many things that some supercomputers can solve, but then there are a lot of problems that they will never be able to solve. And the reason, because they have the problems that we are talking about have this exponential characteristic built into that. And that is why we will never be able to solve that. So that's, this is just a reference, that 10 raised to 300. When we are talking about 300 bits, it is believed that universe contains 10 raised to 80 hydrogen atoms. So we will need more than 3 universe worth of hydrogen atoms to store 10 raised to 300 bits. And when we talk about 1000 bits, 10 raised to 1000, then we are talking about the age of the universe, which is 13 billion. We will need 28 times the current age of the universe to achieve that, but quantum can still do it in no time. Now, it all boils down to where we started, that if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then Richard says that you really don't understand quantum mechanics. And I believe all of us would also agree to this, that though we tried to understand in very superficial manner what quantum computing is, at least I have not even understood it fully, that what it really means. And I'm sure no one would really understood it, but I tried my best to put it in the most simplest form I could do it for students and faculty and myself, because our brain is so much used to thinking about 0 and 1 that we can not easily comprehend. It is like we have to forget what we have learned, and we have to learn something which is radically different. Our brain was never wired to do that from childhood. So what it comes down to is that quantum computing is not just a fast way of doing something. It's not just something beyond a supercomputer. It is a fundamentally, radically different way of doing things. And it can solve certain kind of problems in fractions of seconds, which are impossible for classical computer to solve. But on the other hand, for easy problems that are easily solvable by classical computers, like multiplication of 2 numbers, for example, quantum computer can do that, but it will not add any value because it is going to do it in the same fashion. It will only add value where so in prime factors, if I have to multiply 2 prime numbers, it will be easy on a classical computer. But if I get a number and I have to factor into 2 prime numbers, then it will be easy doing a quantum mechanics. It's still a work in progress. We have 5, 10-bit quantum computers, 5-bit quantum computers from IBM that are there for our to use. We can use Qiskit. Now, I have a PhD student who's doing some quantum machine learning. How we can using certain algorithms, how we can predict the flight delays more accurately and more efficiently using quantum machine learning in real time. There's a lot of limitations, and there's a big time that we still have to work on it, but it's a very, very promising field. I would say it's a very promising field, and it may change the world as we see today. So I know it's difficult. It's difficult to do both the courses together. all your other courses are on classical computing, and quantum computing is radically different. It's not easy. But yeah, if you, what I see is that if we try to compare and contrast classical computing with quantum computing, it starts becoming easy for us to understand quantum computing. So my try would be to somehow do more and more compare and contrast of quantum with the classical and bring it in front of you, just like the chess game, so that, you know, the power of two, so that it becomes easier for our brain to accept quantum computing and help us go into that field. One thing I can definitely say is this field is for somebody who loves discrete mathematics. This field is for somebody who loves physics, not classical physics, but the physics of the universe, the laws of the nature, the quantum world. The people who are inclined towards this should definitely jump into this field. This is the future for them. And maybe the others will have to follow someday. But yeah, it's not that supercomputers are going to cease to exist. But, you know, the world might change. And let us keep our fingers crossed and see what future brings us, and be ready for it. So that's it for today's lecture. We will go into the phenomena of entanglement. We will go into the phenomena of computation, the Shor's algorithm and the Grover's algorithm. And we will also look at the error correction in my lecture tomorrow. And hopefully we'll have a good set of questions if you have understood or if you have not understood, in both cases. And I'm here for answering all the questions. Open to students now.
Yes, students, you can ask the questions now. Unmute yourself and ask the questions.
Sir, sir, are there any logic gates for the quantum computing?
Yes, very nice question. There are logic gates, and tomorrow I will be covering the logic gates also. But understand that these logic gates are again not the simple NOT gate or the AND gate that we have. These are logic gates which are made up of two NOT gates, and they have different names, like Hamilton gate. To achieve something, we have to go through 2-3 gates, and these are quantum gates. So what happens in quantum gates is, which again I'll cover tomorrow, I'll just give a brief. In quantum gates, let's say there is a there is a NOT gate in our classical computer. How does it work? In our classical computer, a NOT gate is, if you pass in a 0, it will give you a 1. If you pass in a 1, it will give you a 0. In the quantum world, there is a gate which sends a 0, but there is also a control bit. If the control bit is 0, the answer will be cancelled. If the control bit is 1, the answer will be whatever is coming and reverse of that. So if you pass in 0 and control bit is 0, it will not act as a NOT gate. It will be 0 only. But if you pass in 0 and the control gate is 1, then it will change the 0 to 1. If you pass in 1 and the control bit is 1, it will change the 1 to 0. So it all depends on the control bit, that what will happen to the input. And one thing is that in this whole process, we need to understand that though we are working on quantum bits, which has the power of 2 raised to n, the input is still classical bits, and the output again comes in classical bits. So input and output is not quantum. It's like a black box. You send in your inputs and you get your output. What happens inside is everything quantum.
Okay, means sir, in quantum computing also logic is crisp, not fuzzy.
Logic is of?
Means logic is only form of 0 and 1, not between 0 and 1.
Not inside quantum. I am saying quantum machine, the input to the quantum machine goes as 0 and 1. What you are sending is 0 and 1 to quantum machine. Inside of the quantum machine, everything is done in qubits. But
Yes, sir.
when you get output from the quantum machine, you again get in classical bits. So the output you will get is again 0 and 1 only. But what will happen within the quantum machine will be in all possible states at the same time, which is not possible in classical computer. It's a black box. It's a black box that can do millions of things at the same time, which is not possible in a classical computer.
Yes, sir.
Yes, anyone else?
Yes. Do you have any questions, students, please, from your side?
Givil, Gidwani, can you ask some question? Yes, anyone else? Madam, काय करायचं?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Rajiv, sir, shall we conclude today's session?
Sure, ma'am. Sure. If there are no
Okay.
more questions, then
Okay.
we
Now I
can
request Professor Vijay More for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, madam, and also thank you, Rajiv sir. Very different level of thinking you explored among the students. So initially, by sir said, Finman, I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. Initially, sir also pointed out that, and sir nicely pointed out that classical computer is solving amazing things, but still there is a lot of domains where the classical computer is untouched. So that can be easily tackled out by the quantum computers and in quantum seconds also. Sir also pointed out the use of or the working of superposition of zeros and ones, and by using the game of chess very easily, where classical computer will be performing only classical move, and quantum computer can perform both of the classical move as well as quantum move. And sir also highlighted on the Young's double slit experiment, and also sir very easily made us understand the quantum computer's powerful nature by exploring the tools power of the performance of the quantum computer. And lastly, sir also pointed out that those who are in the phase of or who are interested in discrete mathematics and physics of the world, they can easily understand the quantum computers working. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And we will sure tomorrow also meet on the different aspects of this quantum computer to understand. And still, if anyone want to ask any question now, is welcome here. Any student want to ask before concluding this session? Or otherwise, this is the madam.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Sakib, if you are asked any question, please you may carry it for tomorrow. Okay. Tomorrow is the session will be on the same schedule time. Okay. 10:30. You should present all of online session before 10 minutes. So with the permission of Dr. Raju sir, we'll conclude today's session.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for
Minister.
joining, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have a doubt with you, sir, Vijay More, sir.
Ah,
About
sir.
the attendance, I have mailed it to because